Everyone, welcome to Prestige Institute's online classes. This is High School Economics Class 1. Today we're going to review supply and demand, one of the models that is central to the understanding of economics. This model is going to represent the interaction between companies and customers that determine the price of a good in a market. Think of it this way. Customers are always looking for a product that is going to be cheaper. For example, if there are two pens being sold in an economy, let's say pen A and pen B, and pen A is sold for $5 and pen B is sold for $10, a customer is always going to go for the first one because it's cheaper. A business, however, if they're the seller, they're going to want to sell it for more money so they can make more. So they would always go for pen B. The supply and demand graph is going to show us that there is a point where the supply and the demand intersect, where both buyers and sellers are going to agree, where maximum efficiency can be reached, and a price where maximum amount of goods are going to be sold for the same price. Before we get into the actual graph, let's review some of the terms. Supply is going to refer to the total amount of a specific good or service available to consumers. It's going to be the amount of a good a business can produce. And the law of supply is going to state as price goes up, quantity supplied also goes up. This positive relationship is going to give us a positive slope when we get into drawing our graph. Demand is going to be the total amount of a specific good or a service customers are willing and able to buy. And the law of demand is going to say as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. So there's an inverse relationship. And the graph, when we get to the supply and demand drawing, is going to be downward sloping. All right, this is going to be our graph. This is going to be what you're going to be drawing and analyzing with questions. A few things you need to include in your graph are title, labeling the axis, the dotted lines, the actual curves, and the equilibrium point. The title for a supply and demand graph can be supply and demand for whatever good you're doing, or just market for example, pencils. If you're doing one for pencils, market for pencils can be your title. Then you have to remember to label the axis. The y-axis is going to be the price, and the x-axis is going to be the quantity, because the graph is going to be showing the relationship between price and quantity. Let's go over the fourth one before we get to the third. The supply and demand curves. As we went over in the previous slides, the supply curve is going to be upward sloping, and the demand curve is going to be downward sloping. This is because for demand, customers are going to want a lower price. So when a product is being sold for, let's say, this price as opposed to this price, more people are going to want it. If the price of a good is higher, then less people are going to demand the good. And for supply, when the price is higher, businesses can make more money off of it, so they're going to produce more quantity. And when you're drawing the supply and demand curves, they don't have to be straight lines. Sometimes you're going to see supply and demand curves like this, like this. But whatever the curve looks like, the relationship is going to be the same. All right, dotted lines and equilibrium. Equilibrium is going to be the point where the sellers and the buyers agree, where the supply curve meets the demand curve. And in order to find the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity, you can draw dotted lines from the equilibrium point to each of the axes. The way you can label the equilibrium price can be like this, price equilibrium, or just price with an asterisk next to it. And quantity the same way. You can label it with a Q with an asterisk, or a Q with this little E next to it. Now at first the dotted lines are going to look like they don't do much, but as you get into shifts and more complicated questions, the dotted lines are going to help you see what's actually happening in the market. So just to recap, when you're drawing a supply and demand graph, make sure you include a title, label the axis, have dotted lines, the actual curves in, and label the equilibrium. Now, before we go into the more complicated graphing stuff with the shifts, let's look at a sample question first. Let's say we have a question that is asking for the equilibrium price and the quantity. Now the equilibrium price and the quantity is going to be where the quantity demanded is going to be equal to the quantity supplied. So in this case, when we look at this table, we see that the quantity demanded is going down as price goes up, following the law of demand. And with the quantity supplied, as price goes up, quantity supplied also goes up, following the law of supply. Where the quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied is right here, 2020, and it's with $6. So our equilibrium price is $6, and our equilibrium quantity is 20. Now the mistake some students make with this is they say, here's a 25 and here's a 25. They're the same. The quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. But the problem with that is they correspond to different prices. So when you're doing this question, make sure you find the price where the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. All right, now let's get into shifts. When we were looking at the previous questions, we had, let's start with demands, our price, and our quantity. Now, let's say we have a point over here. Let's say this is the market for strawberries, and the strawberries are being sold for $5 and 50 people are demanding them. When we increase the price to $10, put dotted lines in, let's say 20 people are demanding them. This increase in price is causing a movement along the demand curve. You're not moving the line, you're just moving your position on the line. You're going from this point to this point. So a movement is caused by a change in price. And then we have shifts. The price is not going to cause a shift. What shifts can be caused by in the demand curve are tastes, related goods, income, number of buyers, and expectations. And we're going to go more into each of them. The way we represent shifts in the supply and demand curve is, that's what the demand curve is. If there's a positive shift in demand, if demand is increasing, then we just draw the demand curve a little bit to the right. And we can label it demand 1. Or if this is labeled demand 1, you would label this new demand curve demand 2. And this would be a positive shift. This would be an increase in demand. If we have a decrease in demand, a negative shift, then we would draw the new line a little bit to the left. And again, label it the same way. All right, now let's look into each of these circumstances. Tastes and preferences are going to refer mostly to trends. For example, think back to the whole fidget spinner thing. When fidget spinners got more popular, suddenly everyone was demanding them. So the demand for fidget spinners increased when it became popular. So when something becomes popular, the demand curve is going to shift to the right, a positive shift. This is demand, this is going to be demand 1. And when a positive shift happens, as you can see, the equilibrium is going from here to here. So the price is increasing and the quantity is also increasing. But then the fidget spinner popularity died out and suddenly we didn't see much people buying them anymore. So if when it was popular, the demand curve was here, suddenly the demand curve was back to where it was before, back to the left. And this shows it decreasing. Related goods are going to be referring to substitutes and complements. Substitutes are basically goods that can replace each other. It's what the name implies. For example, you can use Pepsi and Coke. If Pepsi is suddenly $5 cheaper than Coke, customers are more likely to buy the Pepsi because it's a cheaper option. So if a substitute good for product A goes up in price, the demand for product A will go up. Complements are going to be goods that complement each other. They're going to go together. For example, hamburger buns and hamburger patty. If the hamburger buns are suddenly more expensive, it's going to be more expensive to make hamburgers. So people are going to make less hamburgers, which means they're going to need less patties. So if the price of the hamburger buns go up, then the demand for patties is going to go down. So the relationship between substitute goods and the relationship between complements are going to be the opposite. Also, two more terms you're going to want to remember are normal goods and inferior goods. Normal goods are going to be responding to it normally. When, for example, the income of your, let's say, target population goes up. If people are more money, they're going to be buying more of your good. Inferior goods are the opposite. If the people you're targeting have more money, they're going to buy less of that product. And we can go more over it with the third shifter we have, income. Income means the income of the people who are buying your product. For example, if you're selling toys, if the income of families with kids go up, then you're going to be selling more toys. So the demand is going to shift right. The next shifter we have is number of buyers. Think of it this way. If you have a restaurant, let's say in New York City, and the population suddenly doubles, you're going to have more people to sell to, so the demand for your product is going to go up. Conversely, if you're living in a city that was hit by a natural disaster and you suddenly have less people living in the area, you're going to see less demand because there are less people to buy your product. And lastly, expectations. Expectations is basically what people expect the price of your good to be, or what people expect from your product. For example, let's say a week before the Black Friday, if a customer needs a TV and they know Black Friday is coming up, they're not going to be buying the TV now because they know the price is going to go down in the future. So they will hold off on that purchase, so the demand for the product will go down. Expectations can also be what people think of your product. For example, if people suddenly believe eggs are going to make you stronger, the demand for eggs are going to increase. Then we have the shifters for supply. With supply, again, it's going to be upward sloping, price, and quantity. If there's a positive shift in supply, if supply is increasing, then again, it's going to be a shift to the right. If the opposite is happening, if there's a negative shift in supply, then the supply curve is going to be shifting leftwards. And the shifters are, you can remember with the acronym IRANS, or IRANS, however you want to pronounce it. The first is input goods. Input goods are basically things you use to make the products. They're what goes into the making. For example, if you're making a car and the price of a steering wheel suddenly doubled, you're going to need more money to make the same amount of cars. So if you were able to produce this many cars, now you're going to be producing less. There's a leftward shift in supply. Another example can be oil prices. Oil is needed to transport goods. So if oil prices are suddenly lower, that means you need less money for your production efforts. So your supply curve can shift right, meaning there's an increase in supply. Regulations are mostly going to refer to taxes and subsidies. Taxes are what your business pays to the government, and subsidies is the money you get. So if there's an increase in taxes, that means the company is spending more money, which means they're going to be able to produce less. That's going to be a leftward shift. If you receive more subsidies, then you can make more goods. That's going to be a shift to the right. The next shifter is going to be expectations, and that is similar to the expectations we had with demand. If sellers expect prices to increase in the future, they may decrease the quantity they're selling now in order to be able to supply more when the price increases back. For example, for Black Friday, they may have this many supply, but when they get into the day of Black Friday, they might decrease their supplies. So when the prices increase after Black Friday, they have more supplies to sell, so they can make more money off of the same number of goods. Number of suppliers is exactly what that is. If you're making a supply and demand graph for, let's say, pizza, and 3 more pizzerias open in a town, you're going to have more supply of pizza. And technology basically refers to the efficiency of your production. If you can suddenly make 10 more computers with the same amount of employees and same amount of hours, you're going to be able to supply more. Another way technology can affect it, though indirect, is if the technology advances and you suddenly don't need as many employees, then you're going to be paying less money to the people who are making the products, which decreases the amount of money that goes into making the products, which is going to shift the supply curve to the right. The next thing we're going to talk about is, what if a company is not selling at equilibrium? What if their price is different? There are two situations that might happen in that case: a shortage or a surplus. A shortage is when a company is selling a product for a price lower than the equilibrium price. For example, let's say this is the market for bananas, and the equilibrium price is $5, and at $5, 20 is demand, 20 is sold. And let's say a company suddenly decides to lower the price to $2. In that case, if we draw our dotted lines, the quantity supplied is going to be over here. Let's say that's 10. And our quantity demanded is going to be all the way over here. Let's say that's 30. Now in this case, 30 is being demanded, but only 10 is being produced. And because we can't sell something that is not produced, that doesn't exist, the market will operate over here, because it simply cannot get here because there is not that many being produced. That means we have this amount of shortage. In this case, that's 30 minus 10, which is 20. We have a 20 unit shortage. And our shortages are always going to be under the equilibrium. Or let's say, with the same prices, 5 and same quantity, 20, the company suddenly decides to raise the price to $10. At $10, when we draw our dotted lines, as you can see, the quantity demanded is going to be over here. Let's say 10, because as you remember, if we up the price, the demand is going to go down. And the quantity supplied at price 10 is going to be all the way over here. Say that's 40. Just going to choose a different color. Say that's 40. Now that means we have more supply than we have demand. And that's going to be a surplus. 40 minus 10 is going to be a surplus of 30 units. A surplus is always going to be above the equilibrium. So just to review, a shortage is going to be when demand exceeds supply, and a surplus is going to be when supply exceeds demand. A surplus is going to be above equilibrium, and a shortage is going to be below equilibrium. The last thing we're going to go over before we get into the questions is price ceilings and price floors. These are basically going to be price controls that are set by law. When we talk about price ceilings, we're talking about the highest price you can set. And when we talk about price floors, we're talking about the lowest price you can set. For price ceilings, the example that you're going to see the most often are going to be rents. Let's talk about an example. Let's say in New York City, the equilibrium rent price is $3,000. And let's say at 3,000, 60,000 apartments are being sold. If we set a price ceiling above 3,000, for example at 4K, the economy is still going to be operating at equilibrium, because that's where we see that the supply and the demand agree. That's where the economy is functioning properly. So our price ceiling is not going to be effective. However, if we place our price ceiling lower than the equilibrium, let's draw that line a little bit more straight. If our price ceiling is below the equilibrium, that means this is the highest price we can set. So the economy can't operate over here and has to stay under the price ceiling. That means this many are going to be produced or offered in the city, and this many apartments are going to be demanded. So the economy, because you can't have more apartments sold than demanded, is going to be operating over here. And if you remember from the last slide, this is going to represent a shortage. So in order for a price ceiling to be effective, it needs to be below equilibrium, and that's going to represent the highest price possible. For price floors, the example you're going to see the most often are minimum wage laws. In this case, it's going to be a little different the way we see supply and demand. Price is going to be the money employees are paid. It's going to be the wages. And the quantity is going to be the number of jobs available in the economy. The supply is going to be the amount of people looking for work, and the demand is going to be businesses who are looking for employees. If we have a price floor that is below the equilibrium, and when we have price floors, the economy is operating above the floor. It's the minimum number we can have as price. So the equilibrium can still be operated in. So if we have a price floor that is lower than the equilibrium, it's not going to be effective. The economy can still operate here. But if we have a price floor that is above the equilibrium, that means everything below the price floor is going to be regulated by law, and it's going to be not allowed for the economy to operate in. So we would be looking at everything that is above that price floor. That means, let's say the price floor is at $5 an hour. That means the amount of jobs that are in demand is going to be lower, and the amount of jobs that people want are going to be higher. If we didn't have this price floor, and if, let's say, minimum wage was at $2, then we would be operating over here. And in this case, because it doesn't matter how many supply we have, we can't exceed the demand, we're going to be operating over here. So the thing you need to remember with price ceilings and price floors is, with price ceilings, we want our price ceiling to be below equilibrium, and everything below that is going to be where the economy operates. And with price floors, we want it to be above the equilibrium, and everything above it is going to be where the economy operates. Also, price ceilings are going to be causing shortages, and price floors are going to be causing surpluses. Now let's get into some questions. This corresponds to a decrease in the amount purchased because A, the supply curve is upward sloping, B, consumers will use substitutes, C, higher price means there's an increase in income, and D, expectations might change. Now, first of all, in the question, we see that it's asking about the amount purchased. The amount purchased is going to refer to the quantity, because we have amount, and purchase is going to refer to the demand. Now, because we're asking for the quantity, when we look at the questions, a few of them are out. Higher price means there's an increase in income, and expectations might change. These two options are referring to shifts in demand, not a movement, which this question is referring to with the word amount. So C and D are out. The supply curve is upward sloping, and consumers will use substitutes. Now, A is also out because with purchase, we're referring to demand. So that is also out. So the answer we have left is consumers will use substitutes. And that makes sense because if we have substitutes for a good, then if the price of one good increases, we can easily switch to that substitute. So for this question, the answer would be B. One thing you need to keep in mind that is also shown in this question is if it's asking for the amount purchased or the quantity sold, you're looking at movements rather than shifts. If it was talking about an increase in demand, then you would be looking at shifts. And if it was talking about how price is causing a change in quantity, then you would again be looking at movements because price does not shift either of the curves. Next question we have is, which will not shift demand? Now, we already know price cannot shift any of the curves. We said that in the last slide. So we know the answer is C. A change in price is not going to be shifting the curve. But let's look at the other answers just in case. A change in the price of a substitute good. We know that the substitute good is related to related goods, which was a shifter of demand. So it's not A. Increase in consumer incomes. We know that when people have more money, they're going to be buying the products more. So it's going to shift the demand curve to the right. So that's also not the answer. Change in expectations. We know change in expectation is a shifter of demand and of supply. So we know this is also not the answer, leaving us with C. Now we have a question with a graph. What is the equilibrium price and quantity? Equilibrium was when supply curve and the demand curve intersected. In this case, it is right here. And if you follow the dotted lines, the equilibrium price is 40 and the equilibrium quantity is 150. And our last question, a price of $60 will result in what? Now our equilibrium is here. And a $60 price is going to draw dotted lines there, right here. Supply is exceeding demand. So when supply exceeds demand, we had a surplus. And if we want to say how many units that surplus is, we can just subtract the first number from second number. The quantity supplied that is at $60 minus the quantity demanded at $60. It's going to be 200 minus 100, and that's going to give us 100 units. So what we have at price 60 is going to be a surplus of 100 units. And that's it for today's lesson. In the next class, I'm going to go over the production possibilities curve. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next class.